Now,
Hey, welcome everybody to the Plutopia News Network. Scoop, Sweeney, and John Lebkowski. Scoop and I are going to hang out today and talk about the news.
and there's plenty of that around, so we have lots to choose from. And just if you don't like the news, a guy once said, go out and make some of your own. That was another
Right
guy named
on.
Scoop, and we're making our own right now.
Well, sort of. I mean, there's a plethora, is that the word for it, of stories that are trending right now. And I guess one of the questions I had in my mind is whether they will still be trending by the time we publish this episode. So we'll try to talk about some things that we think will not go stale.
Well,
And
try to avoid going stale, but with news, it goes stale pretty quickly. Just as soon as Donald Trump says something, they'll go off on a track, and everyone will forget whatever it was they were uh, hyperventilating over a few minutes ago.
oh, Donald Trump, is he still around?
That's what I hear. I've tried to ignore him, but it's kind of hard to ignore a loud, uh, omnipresent person like that.
So do you think the internet is rotten?
It may not be rotten, but it's starting to smell funny a few years ago, and it hasn't gotten any better since.
Jonathan Zittrain wrote this article for The Atlantic, which people have been talking about this week. It's called The Internet is Rotting, and talking about how the content that we publish to the internet is somewhat ephemeral. It just kind of goes away. Unlike, like you may have books that are published and stored in libraries and so forth, and those things will rarely just evaporate. But content online does not necessarily have a terrific lifespan and will sometimes go away. And we have referred to that because links go dead. Basically, when content disappears, we refer to that as link rot.
Yeah, and you can find that all over the internet. Just check your bookmarks. If you're like me, I'm a bookmark hoarder. I never clear my bookmark queue there, so I'll go to some older ones, and it's kind of a 50-50 thing. If they're really old, whether they're going to come up or you're going to get a 404 or just some unrelated page that's replaced whatever that was. And that's pretty disturbing if it's something really important. I mean, if it's a link to, great cat pictures, I mean, there's plenty of cats being born every day, so there'll be more pictures. But if it's critical information that you need to, function in this life, then that's a bad thing that's link has gone away and not been replaced by something similar, at least.
The content itself may still be there, but with a different link. And that will sometimes occur when a website is rebuilt. It used to be in web development that we tried to preserve links when we built a new version of a website. I think that practice is not as persistent as it used to be. Um, so some content may still be there, but with a different link. So the link is dead. But there are also whole sites that go away and whole pages that go away, but may still be preserved on something called the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive has something called Wayback Machine. And the Wayback Machine uh, has archives of pretty much any and every website that ever existed. They've certainly tried to archive pervasively. So if you have, let's say you have a website that's been reversioned several times and you want to see what the old version looked like, you can enter the URL in the Internet Archive and you can see like calendars that have various dates on it. You can pick a date in the past and look at what the website looked like on that date. It's sometimes imperfect, sometimes not all of the um, uh, design and imagery is preserved. But generally, you get a pretty good read on older websites and you can find old links. And I've noticed that on Wikipedia, there's a practice of where links have gone dead, of replacing those with Internet Archive links so that you can still access the content.
Yeah, and that the Internet Archive is a really important resource, and it's been endangered over the years at various times because it doesn't get government support or anything. It's basically I'm not sure who all is bankrolling the project because that's a lot of stuff to store. So it requires some really big servers to host all of that. But it's really valuable. I go back and look at my own personal website back, which has been up since the '90s, and you can see a, a good amount of it. Some of their web crawlers didn't quite get through all of my rather lame programming because I have all sorts of subdirectories going down and down and down. So, I think they give up after a few levels, but it gets the basic look of the website. And, and that's nice on a personal website. But the important thing on the links that are dead is it's impacting things like law journals and legal resources where they reference a certain case and you go out to that link and it's gone, and that's a bad thing. That's going to impact someone's legal problems.
On the other side of this, though, the since the internet first appeared and started mainstreaming, there have been various projects to try to preserve all kinds of content, including like digitizing books for the internet library, um, and setting up archives of various kinds of audio, including a bunch of concerts. I think all the Grateful Dead concerts, at least that were recorded, and most of them were recorded, are are found online. There's all kinds of content that you can find online. Uh, we probably have access to more content than we ever dreamed. Well, we obviously have access to more content than we ever dreamed of being able to access, and certainly more than any of us could ever hope to access. Um, so, for the most part, there's a sense that all the all the culture and history of the human race has been stored pretty much online and made accessible, with exceptions, probably a lot of exceptions. But a lot of that stuff is out there. And that's one thing. And then there's this other thing of purely the internet stuff, the evolving internet, and websites coming and going and so forth, and links just going stale, or as say, link rot creeps in. Um, there are dead links out there. How many you actually encounter yourself in your day to day? Probably not many. You probably run across a dead link every now and then, but there are a lot of them out there.
Yeah, the whole idea of stuff disappearing, not just the links, but content becomes unavailable to people. This article you referenced that I just finished reading mentions things like Kindles, where you have your ebooks, and you pay to have these ebooks, and you read it, and you may want to come back to it later on. But if you stop the service, you may not, unless you have somehow managed to rip those and save them off to your hard drive, they're gone. And you don't own them anymore. There's things like that involving music that you subscribe to a service and you think you own this and you think you have a copy of this song, but actually they have a copy of the song that they were letting you rent. So that's a thing that has made me more of an analog type person. I still keep hard copies of not just things I write, but I I save stuff. I have a huge amount of storage here. I have a lot of hard drives on the RAID here, and that's where I keep my stuff because they keep saying, "Well, upload it to OneDrive or one of the other cloud-based storage systems." But I don't have a lot of confidence that that's not going to be purchased by someone who decides, well, all that stuff you have stored up there, we're going to ransom it back. You got to pay us a ransom to get your data back. And that's a big concern of mine, probably just because I'm a paranoid, but I'm an old guy who likes to own the objects and have them in my possession.
Yeah, and in my case, I have a lot of redundancy of digital storage. I tend to have multiple places where things are stored, things that I find valuable, like all of my pictures, for instance. But there's another thing. Years ago, Bruce Sterling ran something that went on for a while called the Dead Media Project. And basically, he was talking about forms of media that um, were no longer in use. And to give you a good example, when computers first appeared, there were these really large, what they called a floppy disk, because it really was floppy. I think those were what, 5.25 inch
Yeah,
discs.
there were some even larger ones that the
Oh yeah.
data centers used, but consumer stuff was 5.25, and I had a ton of those back in the day.
And the day came when they came up with a better format, which was the 3.5 inch disc that was in a bit of plastic, so it wasn't so floppy. It really was a floppy disk, but it was encased in plastic. And when those things came around, the 3.5 inch discs, and all of the computers were being made with readers for 3.5 inch discs, the 5.25 discs, you couldn't read them anymore. They were like dead media.
Well, they were orphaned by the fact that manufacturers stopped putting the drives in the computers.
Exactly. And you could imagine this happening. Imagine what would happen if MP3 was sort of phased out and was no longer a way to read the MP3 format. Think how many uh, billions of bytes have been committed to MP3s stored on computers all over the place. Those would just be dead, basically. Now, it happens that MP3 hasn't gone away, though. Better uh, codecs have appeared, better ways um, to encode music so that it's less lossy. Um, but those have just been sort of like added on. Most players will play multiple different formats. They will play MP3, but they'll also play FLAC, and they'll also play WAVE, and they'll also play the maybe the Apple proprietary formats that are certainly well engineered. So we've avoided that so far because there really hasn't been a reason to dispense with MP3 decoding. But if we did dispense with MP3 decoding, music libraries all over the world would suddenly be defunct.
And I have to remember that most of the music that you stream online, that's coming in an MP3 stream. And my radio stations, I have two internet radio stations, and we stream Radio Free Plutopia over one of them, and that's an MP3 stream that goes out from my computer here to the servers at the source provider. And you can't do I source from the original WAV file because I don't like lossy formats, but it has to eventually be transmitted as an MP3. But if that went away, then there are other things that can be streamed, but you would have to buy a whole bunch of new software to be able to do that, and I don't think anyone's prepared to do that. But yeah, MP3 is and great use for many things. Music is one of them, but there's it's just a great way of storing your music if you're storage challenged. I have way too much storage, so I store everything uncompressed, but most people don't.
Yeah, and it could be that MP3s are more or less lossy depending on the bit rate.
Yeah, and on the equipment used to do
Oh
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the quality is very wild. Remember from the days of uh, Kidnapster or Napster, as they were actually called. And they had a lot of sketchy uh, MP3s that you could download, but there were a lot of LimeWire was one of them where just anybody could upload their favorite rip that they have of their favorite song, and some of them were really good, but a lot of them were really horrifyingly bad. It was like
Yeah.
listening to a really bad tiny transistor radio back in the 60s. It was that poor quality.
I think that Apple, through Apple Music, streams in using the AAC format. Am I correct about that, or do
Yeah,
you know for sure?
yeah. Well, yeah. I've been listening to. I'm not sure. I would imagine so because they, always try to promote Apple products, at the expense of anybody that prefers something else. And I would imagine it probably is AAC, but
Yeah.
that's just the way Apple rolls.
Well, it's a good format. It's certainly not very lossy.
That's right. And yeah, FLAC is a good one. Our friend Cory Doctorow sends us copies of his interview when we've interviewed him. He sent us a FLAC, and we were able to put that up. And it sounds like he's right there in the studio with us, even though we're connecting, over Zoom. And that's a real great thing.
So this is kind of an interesting article. I'll just mention again. It was in the Atlantic, and you can find it online. Um, I'm trying to see the date on this thing. June 30th. It was published June 30th. It's by Jonathan Zittrain.
Yeah. Yeah, did a real good service to libraries. A shout out to libraries. Libraries are not really thought about a lot in this digital age, but there's still a lot of them out there. And there's certain things you just can't get online that you can get at a library. And it's basically just that, you and I both grew up in a small town with a small library, but I spent a lot of time there just because it was a safe place to go and learn stuff.
Great place to find UFO books.
Yeah, and every sci-fi book imaginable. Somebody at that library was a sci-fi geek because they had a lot of nice titles there, of early sci-fi. So don't forget your library. It's not on. Well, they are online now, but the physical library is just a pleasure to me. I like to hold the book in my hand and smell. Libraries have their own smell, even the smell of print and paper.
I remember when they started adding computers to libraries and letting people use them, and then there was a bit of excitement about people viewing pornography on library computers, and then they started creating these filters that they could add to the computer to prevent looking at certain content online.
Yeah,
And when they first added those computers to the, I'm sorry, when they first added those filters to the computers at the libraries here in Austin, the filter was set so in such a restrictive way that you could not access the website for the library. It was blocked.
Another porn site is bites. Yeah, a lot of those filters were pretty sketchy. I mean, they would, you know, filter the obvious. If someone's trying to bring up Pornhub or, you know, Girls Gone Wild or some sort of site like that. Yeah, it's going to catch that, but it was catching stuff that had nothing to do with the pornography, just because it saw a word or a image that it might you know decipher as being porn. Then they blocked that, and a lot of people got really angry. So they have it's a work. It's I think it's still a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, they were
I
using
don't use it.
they were using a product called Cyber Patrol, and they didn't really understand that Cyber Patrol could be set to be more or less restrictive. So they just kind of added it to the computers, and when you add it to the computers, it would default to the most restrictive level. So EFF Austin, which I would have been part of for many years, was sort of called in to consult with them. They were kind of trying to figure out, they were concerned about issues of suppression of speech and information and so forth. And what could they do about, how could they make the best use of these filters? They felt that they had to use them. And in fact, I think that the city directed them that they had to use them. But at the same time, they didn't want them to be unreasonably restrictive. And we helped them understand how to tune the settings so that they would be minimally restrictive, but would still restrict the most egregious things, that they wouldn't want people to be able to see.
I'd get behind a filter that would filter out certain politicians. That would just be. I'd cough up big bucks for that if it would prevent my devices from displaying a Donald Trump or a Dan Patrick or what's his name, the governor?
That's
Rabbit.
because you're one of
Governor
those
Rabbit.
cancel culture liberals. Dang it.
Well.
You just
Yeah.
want to cancel everybody. Everybody who doesn't believe the way you believe.
And a sly little segue into the cancel culture destruction discussion.
Destruction, yes. One of the interesting things about news today, and I've been thinking about this a lot. I have aggregators. One is Apple News, another is Google News. You have these aggregators that display many stories, sort of from many publications, and they've aggregated them into a sort of a collage, really, of news. And I've been thinking a lot about what's the impact of that on your consciousness when you're sort of looking at this, like,
Yeah, who's making those decisions and why?
well, I mean, they're made algorithmically, and they're based in part on what they think you're interested in seeing. So given that, what you see determines what you see. You know what I mean? I mean, it's sort of a cyclical thing. You look at things and they incorporate your viewing preferences into their algorithms so that they give you more of what you seem to want to see, which creates what some people refer to as a filter bubble or kind of an echo chamber. So you're not seeing things that you might find through serendipity or that you might disagree with or whatever.
Well, where I get concerned is who did create the algorithm. I mean, they don't just grow out of an algorithm tree out there in the plains. Somebody has to code that thing. And we all know that there are people out there, not any of us. We're not malicious people, but there are malicious programmers out there who can, slide a little bit of code in there. It says, well, display this if even if this idiot didn't have a viewing history that includes this subject, throw in some Republican talking points or libertarian talking points or whatever, and put that into the feed. That's a concern I have.
I don't think that, just based on my own viewing habits, I don't think that's happening with the applications that I'm using. But I will acknowledge that that is a possibility.
Yeah, you have to trust the provider of whatever it is that's being provided to you, and there are good choices. And there's some, if there is a Fox News feed out there, it's like, no, I don't think so. But yeah, I think Apple and Google are probably relatively reliable.
And they will allow you to tune your feed too. You can
Mm-hmm.
identify things that didn't resonate with you, and they will factor that in. And that's all pretty interesting. The thing that I've been thinking about is how this is really sort of like an information overload, and probably a source of anxiety, really seeing all of this array of news, a lot of it terrible news lately, especially.
Yeah, and we kind of qualify as being digerati types. We've been involved in this for a long, long time, but there are a lot of newcomers to this technology that don't really have anything to base their opinions on. They just see this stuff coming at them. They wonder, what is all this? The world coming to an end? They don't realize this is just stuff that's just being harvested off the internet and thrown at them. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of the world. It may be the end of the world, but I doubt if Google's is going to have uh, an end of the world prediction coming up. It may just look that way sometimes.
I think that it could be interesting. I've thought about doing this, but I haven't really done it, to um, do a fairly detailed comparison of what you're served through Google News versus what you're served through the Apple News application, and look at others too.
Yeah,
And
you
there's
might
other
want to
ways.
throw in the BBC. That's one thing I do when I'm concerned about the news, the way the news is being delivered in this country. I'll look at how they're looking at this country, and it can be quite different.
Well, our friend Cory Doctorow turned me on to something pretty interesting. There, as you probably know, there's has always been or not always, but for a long time, there's been a syndication format. Actually, a couple of them for sites to use to allow their content to travel. Basically, um, one of the formats is called RSS, and there's another one called Atom, and these are just these put the content into a format that can be read um, interoperably by various news readers. And I learned from Cory Doctorow about a news reader that he uses called NewsBlur, which is web based. It's a web based application, and it allows you to subscribe to um, any site that has its content offered in a syndication format. And that tends to be most sites, especially most news sites. So I have configured NewsBlur so that I have a disturbing amount of content, uh, actually dozens and dozens of sites aggregated where I can kind of monitor them or read them in one place.
That sounds like a great service because that's one problem I have with the stuff that just kind of comes up with these random feeds. Is I would like to be able to just say, I want to follow this and this and this and this, but not this.
Well, here you are. See, this is, um, as you can see, and it will give you all site stories. And then you have this uh, list of all the various sites that you may be following. So you click one of those and you see all the latest stories from the particular site that you're looking at. So
well, that's nice. We give the people a link, and we should put it on the posting when this podcast goes live. But tell people where to find this, because
yeah, it's just
that looks valuable.
It's newsblur.com, newsblur.com.
Well, I'll be going there after we get through with this recording session.
Yes, and I was able to. There's a format for taking lists, aggregated lists from one newsreader to another. It's called OPML, or Outline Processor Markup Language. Mm-hmm. And it's an XML format where you can, I mean, what happens is that when you're using a newsreader, like the one I was using previously was NetNewsWire, which is for the Apple computer, like an Apple Mac. NetNewsWire is one that had kind of gone dormant for a while and then got revived recently, and it's good. It's really good. And I had aggregated a lot of content. Actually, before that, I had aggregated content in Feedly, which is another web-based newsreader. And then when I started using NetNewsWire, I made an OPML file. I exported my list of sites that I was reading and imported it into NetNewsWire. And then when I started using NewsBlur, I was able to export again as OPML the list of sites, which had got longer and longer, and import it into NewsBlur. So by now I have this enormous, like unmanageable. I mean, there's no way I could read all this stuff, right? But it does give me a way to monitor a really daunting number of sites and keep track of their content to the extent that I, as a puny human, am able to do that.
Sounds like you have the same problem I do. I have a problem with saving way too many bookmarks. Just, my browser, you open up the bookmark queue and it goes on forever. I'm just sloppy about never getting rid of stuff that I've no longer wanted to go to. But I think having too much news is much better than having none at all. A lot of people don't consume news. They just go through life oblivious to what's going on around them, which is kind of a dangerous thing for anybody these days.
And you might miss something like this. Here's a piece in Boing Boing that shows that fascism and fajitas have the same etymological roots. And you get a diagram to show you how that works. And think how terrible it would be to go through your life without picking up this particular gem of information.
So, okay, now you've short-circuited my brain there. I was going to make some fajitas later on, but that...
Don't be a fascist.
Oh, I've been canceled again. So, cancel culture, John. What are we going to talk about? Cancel culture. That's the weapon of choice of no matter what your political a flavor may be, you have something to do with canceling.
Well, the GOP, these guys over on the right wing of things,
the GOP,
like to play with language and concepts a lot, and they like to weaponize and demonize. And originally, somebody on the left started talking about a cancel culture, referring to the right. And what often happens is that when the right is accused of something, they just adopt it and start using it themselves and accusing their foes on the center and left. Pretty much everybody who's not like a fascist, they start accusing them of doing this particular thing. In this case, cancel culture. The idea is that The left is trying to cancel the right by preventing them from like speaking. It's like in if a college or a university uh, cancels an event where somebody from the right was about to speak, that's supposed to be an example of cancel culture. And they say the left is doing this all the time, but the right does it a lot. They do it too. And it's not really a right wing or a left wing thing. People do it. People
I
are
do it.
constantly choosing to say that they don't want to listen to somebody that they don't want to listen to,
Well,
or
I
they
do
might
canceling.
boycott something.
I do
Yeah,
canceling the old-fashioned way. I have a remote that
there
has
you go.
has a volume control and an on-off switch, and if I want to cancel someone, you're canceled.
Yeah,
But
I've effectively canceled Fox News. I just don't watch them.
yeah, and that's the whole deal about people who want to, you know, people that might have been book burners at some time. They want to stop, certain types of information from getting out, and it's like, come on, people, if you don't want to hear it, don't. There are many ways you can walk away. You can turn the volume down. You can turn the device off. You can go and watch something that you do want to hear. And instead of starting a big campaign to throw throw somebody out of whatever it is that they're doing, it's just like the best. I was a music journalist, but I never did reviews because I just couldn't get behind the whole, because I got to know some of these musicians. They were good people, and I saw them getting trashed by uh, reviewers who had gone to see one thing and they did, it wasn't their thing, so they say something horrible about this artist and ruin their careers. And I couldn't do that. What I did, my best way of giving a negative review was not mentioning them at all. So, if I liked somebody, I would mention them. If I didn't like them, they didn't exist. And that's my idea of criticism. If you don't like them, just move on.
Another perversion of terminology that has bothered me is concerning the term woke. Woke was originally a term used by blacks, and at some point by Black Lives Matter too. It's been an evolving term, and at one point it meant that you were just alert to injustice, and that you were racially sensitive, that you were aware of racism and aware that it's a problem, and could see that racism still exists in our culture. And for some people, it meant like just that by being woke, you were kind of aware of a truth that most people didn't see. But that's been changed on the right so that woke means more like being politically correct or being really pretentious about your concern about a social issue or something like that. So woke has become a pejorative to those guys. And um, you keep hearing about woke culture as well as cancel culture, and they seem to like go hand in hand. And it's like saying that being sensitive to racism is a bad thing.
Well, if you're Alex Jones or the late Rush Limbaugh, being sensitive to that, is a bad thing. They don't. They want to pretend that it doesn't exist at all. There's no racism in this country. This is the red, white, and blue. It's like, okay.
Yeah. And of course, if different people define terms in different ways, it becomes really difficult to communicate.
Yeah, it's just you have to be so careful these days. It seemed like what you say, depending on who's listening to you. You say something to a conservative, and they'll take a completely different meaning out of what you say if you're like myself, a wacko from the left. And you say, if they are, on the other hand, if some conservative says something to me, I might take it to totally different. You have to, people's listening skills, I think, have been compromised over the years. You know, uh, a lot of us have learned to, you know, make our own devious uh, perceptions of what people are saying rather than what what they meant and what you perceive them to have meant are two different things.
Well, and you're talking about conservatives. Uh, I grew up with an understanding of who conservatives were, what they believed, what they liked. These people who are calling themselves conservatives now don't fit that. It seems that the idea of being a conservative has really changed.
Very much so.
I mean, William Buckley is probably rolling over in his grave right now when he hears some of these guys refer to themselves as conservatives. But I don't know. I mean, what the hell is a conservative? What is a liberal?
Do you remember the ongoing debate on TV between Buckley and Gore Vidal?
Gore Vidal, yeah.
That was an amazing. Yeah, I would love to see reruns of that because Buckley was the the be all and end all of conservatism back in those days, but he would probably be kicked out of the party now.
There was a movie called Best of Enemies that was about that. I mean, it was like a documentary about that.
Yeah, it was a charming debate. It was nothing like what you see these days, which are just short of pulling out weapons and attacking each other. But their weapons were verbal, and it was a charming thing to watch, and you learned a lot from it. Having these two different well-spoken gentlemen, talking about the politics of their time.
Well, and they actually believed something, and I mean, they had a fairly sophisticated sense of how the world works, or should work, uh, consistent with their philosophy, a conservative or liberal philosophy. But what's happened now, today, is that the terms liberal and conservative are really kind of opaque. They don't really mean anything exactly. They're more like weapons. They're pejoratives that people toss at each other.
They're a flag somebody waves, basically. And it a lot of times has nothing to do with what their true internal beliefs are. They're just going to wave the current flag that means something to their clan.
That's it. Identity, it's identity politics. You identify as a conservative or a liberal, you don't even necessarily know what that means, or you identify as being on the left or being on the right.
Well,
And and
you look at,
the,
sorry,
I'm just well, there's just such
I'm
a
going to get excited.
there's a confusion, and there's a lack of authority for any sense of reality. So there's much room for confusion because of that.
Well, you talk about confusion. If you're an old Texas conservative, you were probably a Democrat back.
Right.
The Democratic Party was a very conservative party when I was a kid. My dad was a Republican, so he was
It
on.
was a racist party too. There were a lot of racists in
Oh
the
yeah.
Democratic
Well,
Party.
I got to witness the change of the racists in the Democratic Party over to the Republican Party. Back in 1972, I covered the Democratic Party state convention in Houston. We broadcast live from there for KPFT in Houston, and there was a whole thing going on. They were trying to get people to support McGovern. And there was a whole part of the Democratic Party that said, no, we will not, because he didn't like racists. They were flying Confederate battle flags on the floor of the Democratic Convention. And they were championing states' rights. it had nothing to do with slavery. It was states' rights. And I saw Marley Ivins get in their face and like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And they were like, no, it was states' rights. And that whole part of the Democratic Party, after they finally voted, by voice vote to support McGovern, they all quit and became Republicans.
Yeah.
And it was a big game changer there. That election was kind of the high water mark for the racist wing of the Democratic Party. They moved over their high water mark or low water mark over to the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think one of the things that we're liable to see here pretty quickly, and it's probably already happening, is that the Democratic Party is also absorbing the traditional Republican Party, people who were Republicans, but Republicans in the sense that we thought of, I mean, I just say traditional Republicans, traditional conservatives who no longer feel comfortable in the party of Trump. A lot of them are identifying as independents now, but some are becoming Democrats, and the Democratic Party may ultimately become home for those people.
Yeah, and the Democratic Party needs to welcome them in. They may be a little different in their beliefs, but anybody that will abandon the Trump Party is a friend of mine. I mean,
Sure,
we
but
can
a
always have
question
disagreements, but you can agree to disagree and try to move to a better form of politics.
a question that raises is that if the Democratic Party becomes the party of centrists, like those people, unlike centrist Democrats, um, then what happens to the farther left, which felt that it had a home in the Democratic Party? Are those guys going to bail? Are they going to start their own party? Are we going to have three parties? People have told me that that's impossible. You can only have two parties. Any additional parties that are created are going to be marginalized. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not so sure about that. It seems to me that we have three distinct forms of political thinking. That there's a kind of far left and a far right, and then there's the center. And centrist Democrats and centrist Republicans are probably closer to each other than they are to the far left or the far right. And the big question is like who can prevail? Currently, the really far right people that we used to think of were like too crazy to ever get control of anything, they have found their way to power. And they have a lot of power, but I don't think that extremists can do a good job of holding power over the long term. So I think that may be a temporary thing. And I think that I can't help but think that we're going to see a majority emerge that has elements of both the Republican and the Democratic parties.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the aging of the parties too. Different age groups tend to have a different form of political belief. When I was much younger, I was way off to the left side. And being an old fart now, I'm somewhat moving not to the center, but closer to it. The thing that concerns me, though, about a third party, we've seen what happens to one party or another when a third one crops up. It usually means that both of those parties end up losing, and the one that wasn't split off from, will maintain power as long as those two parties exist. And that, it's a terrible thing to say, but it scares me. I watched the Independent Party. Was it Ross Perot and those guys? They hurt the conservatives. And then we had.
Well, I just find that fascinating.
Yes, Mr. Perot. And it's just like, well, the Green Party, they had some some impact on the last election, and there were some sketchy people involved with the Green Party. I'd like the concept of a environmentally conscious party, but depends on who's driving the who's driving the car there, and some of those folks were kind of sketchy.
The problem with politics is that it just breeds corruption.
Yeah.
You take power, power corrupts, and we go through these cycles of losing our, I guess, safeguards against corruption, and things start becoming really, really corrupt. Right now, there's so much corruption, and the corruption's the problem. It's really not the right or the left or whatever. It's that we have corrupt opportunists who are doing everything they can to take power, and it's really about that. It's about power, and it's probably about money too. And we've been there before, and
Yes.
it eventually it blows up, and
Well,
it's going to blow up again. I mean, there's going to be a time in the future when people look back at Trump as kind of an anomaly, I think. But right now, he feels like an incredibly dangerous person.
well, I've got an idea. We
All
need
right,
we need to create our party,
cult.
the
We need to
Pluto
have a cult.
cult too. Yeah, parties are pretty much cults anyway. I mean, look at
There you go. There you go.
look
You
at
got it.
your average politician and compare them to like Jim Jones or the Reverend Moon. I mean, they're right up there on the cult, dais. Why not us? I think we would make great cult leaders. I could lead you over.
I'm open to that. I'm
I could
certainly
lead
open to
someone
that.
over a cliff as easily as anyone else. I can send you down the path to perdition with great ease.
Well, corruption wouldn't seem so bad if it was lining my pockets.
It's our corruption. That's a secret. Don't get involved with those Republican and Democratic corrupt people. Come to our corruption. It's much better. It tastes better, and it has a longer shelf life.
Oh, before we drop off, I want to give a shout out to Chris Tomlinson. Chris and this guy named Brian Burrow had written a book about the Alamo. And
Oh, I
it's,
saw that is amazing.
yeah,
And
revisionist
he got
history, really.
canceled by Bullock.
Yeah, the Bob Bullock Museum refused to let them speak there, or they canceled. And this is an example of right wing cancel culture.
Yeah, because we know
Because
who's on the board of directors at the Bullock, the
exactly.
governor, the lieutenant governor, and lots of other of their crowd.
I'm looking at something that Chris posted on Facebook. And let me just look here. Margaret Cook of the, I guess, of the Writers League. So it is a rare occurrence for us to be placed in this position, and we ask for your understanding. Perhaps at some point in the future, you will once again feel at home at the museum and have your confidence in our commitment to tell the complex story of Texas restored. And he says if they want to restore their reputation, they can ask us back. And if Governor Abbott is serious about protecting free speech and an open exchange of ideas at state institutions, he will order them to invite us back. Let's wait and see if that happens.
Yeah, well, I would love to invite them down to talk with us, because that's just a marvelous subject. And the fact that they got stomped on by this supposedly great museum, come on, people. The truth hurts, but it's got to be out there.
Well, Scoop, I think that we've damaged the news enough today. How about you?
My babble organ is just about babbled out, so I'm going to babble off into the sunset and mix me a margarita.
Oh, man, and I'm going to have a glass of wine.
There you go.
Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us and listening to us babble, as Scoop says. This is the Tower of Babel, after all.
Amen, brother.
And we will
we'll
be
see
back.
you down the road.
Right. We'll be back the next time with a guest of some kind.
Yeah, that's the idea. But until then, folks, stay there, stay weird, and stay safe.
All right. Adios.
Later, Tater. You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.